there are many reasons that we should be horrified about the state of Biden's Build Back Better agenda. The fact that it has become so whittled down and stalled in Congress casts some serious doubts as to whether we can stave off the right in the midterms, let alone in the 2024 presidential election. But it's also horrifying if you care about climate change. Even before compromises were made, the Build Back Better agenda had a lot of limitations in terms of how far it was willing to go towards a transition to renewable energy. But now, many of the more ambitious proposals on climate change have been cut from the bill. And pretty much weekly now, we're seeing or experiencing big signs that the climate is changing and we need to do something really fast. The situation looks really bleak at the federal level. But what's been largely unnoticed is that there have been great strides made in recent years to enact ambitious Green New Deal policies at the state level, most notably in Maine, Connecticut, Illinois, and New York. And what makes these initiatives so important is that they actually have strong support and buy-in from labor unions, including unions that represent workers in the fossil fuel industry. Slowly but surely, the labor and environmental movement are learning to come together and hammer out ambitious but realistic plans to move towards a renewable energy future. The left needs to take lessons from these experiences and seize the political opportunities that exist at the state level. These states have offered a much more promising model of how climate activists engage with the labor movement. Far too often, the climate movement pays lip service to making the Green New Deal pro-worker, but doesn't put in the legwork to get true buy-in from labor. In these places where labor has been supportive of the Green New Deal, the key was that labor was included and involved in the conversation from the very beginning and not as an afterthought. In 2019, Maine's AFL-CIO was behind a state-level climate bill that called for 80% renewable electricity by 2040, solar power for public schools, the creation of a task force to study economic and job growth, and a commission to facilitate a just transition to a low-carbon economy. The bill was the brainchild of a young state lawmaker named Chloe Maxim, and in these times covered the different ways she went about building the coalition, saying, Maxim, by contrast, sought to bring allies into her coalition prior to going public with the legislation, and Maine labor environmental groups did not have a deep history of working together before. I've been an organizer for a long time, and to build power and to really create something inclusive, I knew it had to be inclusive from the very beginning, she told in these times. The traditional strategies that we've used around climate and climate policy just have not really gotten us very far. You do not have to be an expert on labor unions in order to make a respectful attempt to include them in the process of formulating ambitious legislation. Matt Schlabbaum, the executive director of the Maine AFL-CIO, spoke about how environmental organizations can work with labor. Schlabbaum said if he were to give advice to environmental leaders about how to organize effectively with labor, he'd encourage them to make deliberate efforts to understand unions and engage them in a good faith process. And I think just the basic organizing one-on-one of showing up for each other, he said. There's a lot of strikes and picket lines these days, but do environmental organizations show up at teacher strikes and grocery worker strikes? Our starting point has to be an understanding of why merely saying just transition over and over isn't good enough. We need to understand why a history of bad experiences has made many labor unions skeptical of promises to retrain for workers for renewable industries, or that we can even create unionized renewable industries. Take a listen to the Maine AFL-CIO head, Matt Schlabbaum.
When you look at the experience of a trade adjustment assistance program and its colossal inadequacy for what has happened in the kind of economic restructuring of the last 30 years, people are skeptical for good reasons about whether this will pan out in the way that we would like it to. And to your point, Lara, the jobs that have been created in solar installation or energy efficiency have largely been low-road jobs without career paths, without sufficient training. So this is the fundamental challenge here. I believe Alex's numbers. I think there is a massive, massive, massive opportunity.
So climate activists in Maine were successful because they took these concerns seriously and made it clear to labor that they would be central in any clean energy proposals. More recently, the Illinois legislature passed a landmark climate jobs bill that could serve as a model for the rest of the nation. This bill was the initiative of Climate Job Illinois, a coalition of environmental groups and labor unions, including the Illinois AFL-CIO and Chicago Federation of Labor. The bill puts the state on the path to achieve carbon-free power by 2045, shut down all fossil fuel plants by 2045, and 100% clean energy by 2050. It also preserved a few nuclear power plants that not only provided high-paying union jobs, but were a crucial component of the non-carbon emitting energy in the state. Project labor agreements will be required on all utility-scale wind and solar projects. These agreements ensure union labor will be used and fair contracts enforced. For other non-residential clean energy projects, workers will still need to be paid the prevailing wage even if they aren't in a union, and the employers need to remain neutral in the face of any unionization drives. This is a significant measure to rein in an industry that has already developed a reputation for bad working conditions and being anti-union. As one Illinois labor leader described, the renewable industry, particularly in the solar industry, in Illinois has promoted the idea that investment in green jobs will create good jobs in Illinois. While experience has shown that, though there are jobs being created through projects like solar farms, what we have seen here to date has been workers coming in from out of state primarily who are paid little more than minimum wage, said Sean Stott, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the Midwest region of the Laborers International Union. This legislation will correct that, and it will require developers and contractors that install solar projects and other renewables to pay a good wage, a wage that workers can sustain their families on, that they can build a career on. The just transition formulated in this bill in Illinois is serious and detailed. The Energy News Network reported that the Climate Union Jobs Bill includes a just transition plan requiring advance notice of coal plant closures and support for displaced workers, including 24 months of health insurance available at the previous cost and benefit level, full tuition scholarships for trade schools and higher education, and employment assistance. Empowerment zones created by the bill would incentivize investment in areas with closing coal plants. That is a just transition program that actually takes into account the real life concerns workers and their unions would have about moving off of fossil fuels. The legislation also includes measures related to racial justice. Apprenticeship programs will be expanded to include many more Black and Latino applicants, and clean energy companies will be required to report their progress on diversity hiring. And drawing inspiration from Jamal Bowman's Green New Deal for Public Schools legislation, the Illinois bill also has a program to install solar panels on public schools in the state. These are just some of the highlights. And Illinois in all has shown that it's possible to be ambitious about fighting climate change in a way that creates good union jobs at the same time. Previously, about a year ago, we had on our show Lara Skinner, who spoke about the success they've had in New York in getting labor on board with green jobs. And in June, SB 999 passed in Connecticut with labor support because the bill ensures project labor agreements for renewable energy products. In each example, activists had success because they truly respected the knowledge and skills possessed by those who actually work in the energy industry. It's difficult and frankly arrogant to imagine how we make such a huge transformation in our energy system without the buy-in from those that actually work in it. Lee Phillips, in his excellent article for the Breakthrough Institute, put it best, saying, "For labor, the main issue is that few Green New Deal promoters thought to formally talk to workers, the people most directly affected by the legislation, before drafting it. Such an oversight is astounding. The AFL-CIO Energy Committee brings together almost all the unions that work in the energy sector, both fossil and clean, but also the United Mine Workers and the formidable United Steelworkers. There's perhaps no greater collective body of tacit and formal knowledge about energy and the machines and processes it involves than what sits in the heads of members of these North American industrial unions. We need to do better as a movement, but the experiences in Illinois, Maine, Connecticut, and New York show that we actually are starting to do better. And dysfunction at the federal level does not mean that all we can do is despair, and is not an excuse for inaction. State governments possess a lot of revenue to work with, and things they do can serve as models that eventually filter up to the federal level. Electoral campaigns for the left are more manageable at the state level, and pro-union Green New Deal legislation should be a core part of the platform of any left candidate. The common phrase about organizing conversation is that you should listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. We need to listen to our union members in the energy sector and include them from the very beginning in any conversation about a renewable energy future. So, Jen, what do you think?
You know, Paul, that is good news after all of the bad news that we have covered basically on the vast majority of our shows. I do want to say that the reason why these examples are so heartening in particular is because I feel like on the left, we hear this line all the time that jobs versus the environment is a false dichotomy, right? Like, I'm sure you've heard it multiple times. Like, everybody says it over and over. But, lately, I think as the Green New Deal project has started to become more popular, and we've seen some of these conflicts between, climate activists and labor starting to sharpen a little more. Like, one question I have is it a false dichotomy? Like, I want it to be, and it should be. And I think that these projects that you've highlighted show that it is. But as you were saying, I think that it's really going to take a lot of work to not just say that we can do a just transition, but to actually show how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think, is it a false dichotomy? It's like, I mean, yes and no. I mean, it depends
Right.
depends how you do it. I mean, but again, we've already lived through examples of, like, as the Maine AFL-CIO guy, who of course is actually extremely pro, action on climate change, as they proved in Maine. But he said we've
Yeah.
already lived through experiences where it is a real dichotomy
Hmm.
that has hurt workers.
Hmm.
And I think, like, part of the problem sometimes is maybe just assuming we can't make assumptions. Like, no one can read our mind. I mean,
Hmm.
you might be thinking that you want to do something in a pro worker way, but again, if you're not really reaching out to the relevant people, and again, also, it's like actually a real, and this is something Lee Phillips goes into more detail in his article. Like, we should be a little bit humble on the science and the engineering. It's like, I have no goddamn idea how the hell we move off fossil fuels, like, in
Hmm.
reality, in an
Hmm.
actual scientific and engineering sense. I mean, but the workers that work in the energy sector understand how this works, and they might understand what is more realistic than other things. So, I think we should
Yeah.
have humility about that and draw on the expertise of people that actually would know how that kind of transition would work and would be the people implementing it.
Yeah, I just want to second that. That Lee Phillips article is really great. I encourage everybody to check it out. That was published by the Breakthrough Institute, and that point in particular in his piece, where he basically points out that energy sector unions have not just been thinking about just transition and about renewable and clean energy options for a while. They actually know better than anyone, as you said, how to do it, how to actually implement it, and they've been working on their own plans. And so, as you said, it is in some senses like very weird and arrogant to kind of come in and be like, well, we have a good idea. Like, do you want in on this?
Right. Yeah, but again, I mean, I'm heartened by some of these examples, and especially the
Right.
Illinois bill, because again, it's actually extremely ambitious, and yet they have these major building trades unions and others on board. And I also like how it combines, you know, yes, there's fossil fuel workers and their unions on board, but also teachers unions because of the
Hmm.
stuff around, solarizing public school buildings, retrofitting them. So, I see a lot of opportunity here if we play our
Hmm.
cards right, and I'm
Hmm.
hopefully more and more people are learning, and we can take these models and try to apply them in our own states.
I have a last question for you, and it might be a little spicy. I'm not sure, but
Mm.
the question is, what do you think of the phrase Green New Deal, or like, what do you think of calling the project of green jobs, or lumping the project of green jobs under this umbrella of the Green New Deal? Because I almost feel like at this point, it kind of has a lot of baggage, right? And like some of it is totally unwarranted. But again, when we look at what Lee Phillips and others have pointed out, that the architects of the Green New Deal like just did not include labor from the beginning, and I think that really kind of sort of set up a like fraught dynamic that we see play out, over and over again. I have hesitations. I'm not ready to like throw it out completely, but I also want to point out, and I think I have brought this up on the show before, that like lots of people just don't know what the Green New Deal is, and it actually is a kind of confusing thing to understand because it's not really a piece of legislation. It's a resolution. It's also non-binding. I as I think we've made pretty clear, like I like everything that's covered under the Green New Deal. And I think in a way it is a useful framework or a useful umbrella term for a variety of different projects. But I don't know. What do you think, Paul? Has it been poisoned?
Yeah, it's tough because when the slogan first came out, I mean, I really liked it because it's like, yeah, draw in the history of the New Deal. I think enough people kind of know something about that. And yeah, Green New Deal. But yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think it has been kind of like, poison. And again, in many ways unfairly, but it has been. But I think that most importantly, again, if you actually are doing the work to reaching out to unions, like at the end of the day, you'll figure out what to call it, and people will be okay with it because, some of these bills, I forget which one, but I think the one in Maine was called something like a Green New Deal. But again, I think if you've built a relationship, they won't care about the word as much as the substance.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.